My girlfriend got upset because I went out with friends once to celebrate my special day, so I blocked her everywhere and broke up with her. Hey everyone, my name is Tyler, and I want to tell you about a relationship that I thought was going to be the one, until it became something I barely recognized. Jessica and I had been together for 6 months when everything started falling apart, but for the first few months everything felt absolutely perfect. Like really fucking solid in a way that relationships had never felt for me before. We met at this random house party where I wasn't even supposed to be. One of those last-minute invitations where a friend drags you along and you almost say no because you're tired from work. Our first conversation was about terrible HBO shows and why anchovies absolutely belong on pizza. I knew she was different from that very moment. She had this incredible laugh and actually found my stupid jokes funny, but she also wasn't afraid to call me out when I was being an idiot. There was something refreshing about her honesty that drew me in immediately. Jessica had this amazing way of making even the most boring Tuesday nights feel like an adventure. We'd end up having these deep conversations that would stretch until 3 in the morning, talking about everything and nothing all at once. The chemistry between us was incredible, not just physically, but emotionally too. I'm talking about the kind of connection where you're both completely present with each other, not just going through the motions like I'd done with other girls in the past. She'd show up at my place after work still wearing her scrubs from the veterinary clinic where she worked, her hair all messy from a long day. But somehow she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. We'd order takeout from whatever place we were craving that night and binge-watch shows on Netflix, but more often than not, we'd end up turning off the TV and just talking instead. It felt easy in a way that relationships had never felt easy for me before, like we just naturally fit together. So when my lease was coming up for renewal, the idea of moving in together seemed like the most natural next step in the world. She'd been practically living at my place anyway. Her toothbrush had a permanent spot on my bathroom counter, half her clothes had somehow migrated into my closet, and that expensive face cream she was always worried about leaving behind had claimed its own shelf in my medicine cabinet. Plus, her roommate situation was getting increasingly weird with some drama I never fully understood. It involved passive-aggressive notes about dishes and someone's boyfriend staying over too much. We found this decent one-bedroom place in a better neighborhood than either of us could afford on our own. I remember thinking to myself that this was it. This was me finally taking the next step and being an actual adult in a real committed relationship. Everything felt like it was falling perfectly into place. The first week of living together was like playing house in the absolute best possible way. I remember thinking we'd nailed it. We were like one of those couples you see in movies who just effortlessly blend their lives together. Jessica would wake up before me every morning and make coffee exactly how I liked it, strong enough to wake the dead with just a splash of that almond milk she'd somehow converted me to drinking. I'd never been an almond milk guy before her, but she made this whole case about how much better it was. And honestly, she was right. I'd come home from work each evening and find her curled up on our couch in our living room, watching our TV, and it hit me every single time how good it felt to say our instead of my. There was something incredibly satisfying about that shift in language. It made everything feel more real, more permanent. She'd started buying groceries for both of us without us even discussing it, planning meals that took both our preferences into account. Her little collection of different tea bags had completely taken over my kitchen counter, and somehow our stuff had merged together like we'd been living together for years instead of just days. But then something shifted in our dynamic, and I swear it happened practically overnight. Everything had been going so smoothly that what came next caught me completely off guard. About 3 weeks into our cohabitation, I was texting with my high school friends about grabbing dinner at this new burger place everyone had been talking about. We'd been planning to check it out for weeks, and Jake mentioned during our conversation that he hadn't seen my apartment since I'd moved into the new place, so I suggested they should come over on Saturday evening instead. We could order some food, hang out like old times, just relax and catch up. Nothing fancy or elaborate, just the 3 guys I'd known since freshman year of high school, sitting around talking shit and probably playing video games until way too late, like we'd done countless times before. When I mentioned this plan to Jessica that evening while we were making dinner together, her whole energy changed in an instant. I'm talking about a complete transformation that happened right before my eyes. I literally watched her face go from relaxed and happy. She'd been laughing at something stupid I'd said just moments before, to something I'd never seen from her before. Cold doesn't even begin to cover it. She looked at me like I just told her I was planning to burn our apartment down with her inside it. "You didn't ask me first," she said, and the way she said it made me feel like I'd committed some kind of serious crime instead of inviting 3 guys I'd known for over a decade to eat pizza in my own living room. I tried to explain that it really wasn't a big deal. Just the guys coming over, and they probably wouldn't even stay that late since we all had to work on Monday. But I could tell she'd already mentally checked out of the conversation completely. It was like trying to have a reasonable discussion with a wall, except walls don't give you the kind of look that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the person you're supposed to be building a life with. She finished eating her dinner in complete silence, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. When she was done, she cleaned up only her own plate and left mine sitting there on the table, then went to bed without saying another word to me. I sat there finishing my meal alone, wondering what the hell had just happened and how a simple mention of having friends over had turned into this. The next morning was even weirder than the night before. Jessica got ready for work like I wasn't even there, and I mean that literally. She moved around our bedroom and bathroom like I was completely invisible, gathering her things with this cold efficiency that made my stomach churn. When I said good morning, she didn't respond. When I asked if she wanted me to make her coffee like I did every morning, she didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. She just collected her stuff and left for work without a single word. I stood there in my boxer shorts, holding 2 coffee mugs that I'd optimistically prepared for both of us, wondering what the hell had just happened to us. Was this even a fight? I couldn't figure out what I'd done that was serious enough to deserve this level of complete freeze-out from the person I was supposed to be closest to. That entire day at work, I kept replaying our conversation from the night before, trying to figure out where exactly I'd screwed up. Maybe I should have asked her first before inviting my friends over. But we weren't married, and this was still my apartment too, wasn't it? I'd never needed permission to have friends over before in any of my previous relationships. But then I started second-guessing myself, wondering if living together meant there were different rules now that I wasn't aware of. Maybe I was being inconsiderate without even realizing it, and she had every right to be upset with me. By the time I got home from work, I was ready to apologize for whatever I'd done wrong and figure out how to make things right between us. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say during my drive home, planning to acknowledge that I should have discussed it with her first, and that we could reschedule for a time that worked better for both of us. Except when I walked through the door, she still wasn't talking to me. We were now on day 2 of complete silence while living in the same 800 square feet of space. She'd cook dinner for herself, eat it while scrolling through her phone like I didn't exist, wash only her own dishes, and act like I was some kind of ghost haunting our apartment. I tried everything I could think of to break through this wall she'd put up. I apologized. I tried explaining my perspective. I even attempted to make light of the situation with some jokes, thinking maybe humor could diffuse whatever this was. But she'd just look right through me like I was made of air, like my words weren't even reaching her ears. Is this how people handle disagreements when they live together? Because I'd never experienced anything like this before. The girls I'd dated before would yell when they were upset. We'd have it out, argue our points. Maybe someone would storm off for an hour or two, and then we'd either work it out or decide to break up. This was something else entirely. This felt calculated and deliberate, designed to make me feel exactly as confused and desperate as I was feeling. By day 3, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was driving me crazy, and I felt like I was losing my mind living with someone who refused to acknowledge my existence. I told her I'd call the guys and cancel our plans, that we could figure out a better time that worked for both of us, and that I should have discussed it with her first before making any commitments. And just like that, like someone had flipped a switch, she was back to being the Jessica I knew. Suddenly she was smiling again, being affectionate, asking about my day like the past 3 days of complete emotional warfare hadn't happened at all. That night, she initiated sex for the first time since this whole nightmare had started, and I was so relieved to have her back that I didn't even question how bizarre and unsettling the entire situation had been. But lying there afterward, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been trained like some kind of animal. Like I'd been put through a conditioning process where my behavior had been modified through punishment and reward, and I wasn't entirely comfortable with how easily it had worked on me. Hey there, I'm Jessica, and I think it's only fair that you hear my side of this story too. Here's the thing that nobody wants to admit about moving in together. Everything changes the second you start sharing a space with someone. If you don't establish clear boundaries right away and make sure both people understand what respect looks like, you're going to get walked all over. I'd learned this lesson the hard way with previous boyfriends who thought that living together meant they could do whatever they wanted without considering how their decisions affected me. I wasn't about to let that happen again. Tyler was sweet, don't get me wrong. He was really genuinely sweet, and I cared about him deeply. But he had this typical guy thing where he'd make decisions like he was still single, like my feelings about our shared space didn't matter at all. The dinner party situation was a perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about. He didn't ask me about it, Didn't even give me a heads up that he was planning to invite people over. He just decided all on his own that our Saturday night was going to be invaded by his high school buddies, guys I barely knew beyond brief introductions at a few parties. What if I'd had plans for that evening? What if I'd wanted a quiet night and after a long week at work? What if I just didn't feel like playing hostess to a bunch of guys who were probably going to trash our living room and leave me to clean up the mess afterward? So yeah, I shut down completely. That's what I do when someone doesn't respect me enough to include me in decisions that affect both of our lives. I'm not going to argue and beg to be heard like some desperate girlfriend who has to fight for basic consideration. If he wants to act like my opinion doesn't matter, then fine. But he can figure out real quick what it feels like when I'm not around to make his life easier and more comfortable. No good morning coffee made exactly how he likes it. No dinner conversation. No pretending that everything's okay when it's clearly not. People love to act like the silent treatment is some kind of cruel manipulation, but honestly, sometimes it's the only way to get through to guys who refuse to actually listen to what you're saying. Words clearly weren't working with Tyler. Every time I tried to express concern about something, he'd just brush it off and tell me it wasn't a big deal, making me feel like I was being overly dramatic for wanting basic consideration in my own home. But when I stopped engaging entirely, when he couldn't rely on me to just smile and go along with whatever he decided without consulting me, suddenly he started paying attention to what I was actually trying to communicate. And look, I wasn't trying to be cruel or anything like that. I just needed him to understand that we're supposed to be a team now, that major decisions affect both of us, and that completely ignoring my input has real consequences. The fact that he canceled his little party and apologized, admitting that he should have talked to me first, showed me that he'd finally gotten the message I'd been trying to send. When he apologized and acknowledged that he should have included me in the decision-making process, I knew we could move forward and actually be stronger as a couple because of working through this conflict. Living together successfully means you're building something together, and that requires mutual respect and consideration from both people involved. My ex before Tyler never understood this fundamental concept about partnership and mutual respect. He'd invite people over constantly without checking with me first, make all kinds of plans without even pretending to care about my schedule, and treat our apartment like it was his personal bachelor pad where I just happened to sleep sometimes. I spent 2 miserable years feeling like a guest in my own relationship, always having to accommodate his schedule, his friends, his priorities, while my needs and preferences were treated like they didn't matter at all. Never again was I going to let myself become invisible in my own life. The physical intimacy aspect is deeply connected to all of this, whether people want to admit it or not. When someone disrespects you, dismisses your feelings, and makes you feel small and unimportant, how are you supposed to feel emotionally close to them? Sex isn't just something you do regardless of how you're being treated by your partner. It's supposed to come from genuine connection, from feeling valued and cherished by the person you're with. When Tyler ignored my feelings about the dinner party situation, it created this huge emotional distance between us. Of course, I didn't feel like being intimate with him until we'd properly worked things out, and he'd shown me that he understood why I was hurt. I've never understood women who fake it, who pretend everything's fine when their partner has just hurt them, just to keep the peace and avoid conflict. That's not authentic, and it definitely isn't healthy for anyone involved. If I'm upset with you, you're going to know it, and we're going to deal with the underlying issue before we get back to our normal routine. That includes physical affection and intimacy. I'm not going to kiss you goodnight and act loving when you've just shown me that my feelings don't matter to you at all. But here's what I realized after we worked through that first major incident. Tyler actually listened to what I was trying to tell him. He genuinely changed his behavior based on our conflict. He started checking with me before making plans that affected our home, asking for my input instead of just assuming I'd be okay with whatever he decided. That's real growth. That's maturity, and that's exactly what a genuine partnership should look like. Our relationship got so much better because of working through this challenge together. The makeup sex that night was absolutely incredible because it came from a real place. From him showing me that he respected me enough to actually change his behavior and consider my needs. My mom always told me that you teach people how to treat you in the first few months of any relationship, whether it's romantic or otherwise. If you let someone walk all over you early on and establish that pattern, they'll keep doing it forever because they've learned that there are no consequences for disrespecting you. But if you set clear boundaries and stick to them, if you show them that disrespecting you has real consequences, they learn to treat you better over time. It's not manipulation, Waz, it's just basic human psychology and healthy relationship dynamics. The thing is, I could tell that Tyler actually appreciated having someone who wouldn't just roll over and accommodate his every whim without question. His ex-girlfriends, from what he'd told me about his past relationships, were all the type to just go along with whatever he wanted without ever challenging him or making him consider someone else's perspective. None of those relationships had lasted very long. And where's the challenge in that kind of dynamic? Where's the growth and development that comes from being with someone who pushes you to be better? I was helping him become a better partner by teaching him to consider someone else's needs instead of just focusing on his own desires all the time. After we worked through the dinner party situation, everything felt so much more balanced between us. Tyler started asking for my opinion about weekend plans, checking with me before committing to having friends come over, and actually considering my schedule before agreeing to social obligations. We began making decisions together like actual adults instead of him just assuming I'd fall in line with whatever he wanted to do. Our communication improved dramatically, our intimacy deepened in ways I hadn't expected, and I felt like we were actually building something real and meaningful together. This was what a mature relationship was supposed to look like, two people working as a team instead of one person calling all the shots. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't always easy for either of us. Sometimes I could see Tyler getting frustrated when I needed time to process things, when I couldn't just bounce back immediately after a disagreement like nothing had happened. But that's the fundamental difference between a mature relationship and just playing house together. Real partnerships require real work, genuine communication, authentic respect for each other's emotional needs, and the willingness to grow and change. If someone can't handle that kind of emotional investment, if they want a girlfriend who will just smile and nod and never challenge them to be better, then they're simply not ready for the kind of deep, committed relationship I was offering. A few weeks later, Tyler got the promotion he'd been working toward for over a year. He was promoted to senior account manager with a decent raise and his own office with an actual window instead of that fluorescent nightmare he'd been stuck in before. I was genuinely excited for him when he called me right after his boss gave him the news. His happiness was infectious, and I was proud of how hard he'd worked to earn this recognition. We made plans for a nice dinner that weekend to celebrate this milestone, maybe that Thai place I'd been wanting to try for months. Everything felt normal and good between us. Our communication had improved so much since working through our first major conflict, and I thought we'd really learned how to navigate disagreements in a healthy way. Then Tuesday rolled around, and Tyler's work buddy Carlos mentioned that a few people from the office were planning to grab drinks on Thursday to celebrate the promotion. Nothing crazy or elaborate, just the usual crowd from his workplace hitting up that sports bar near their office for a couple of hours after work ended at 5. Tyler figured he'd mention it to me when he got home that evening, probably planning to see if I wanted to come along or if I had other plans for Thursday night. But the second he brought up this work celebration, I could feel the temperature in the room drop about 20 degrees. I got that familiar feeling again, the same one from the dinner party incident. There was this slight tightening around my eyes, and my whole body went rigid as I processed what he was telling me. It felt like he'd just announced he was planning to rob a bank instead of simply having a beer with his coworkers to acknowledge his professional success. "Why do you need to celebrate twice?" I asked, and I could hear the edge in my own voice that made his face change immediately. Tyler tried to explain that it wasn't really celebrating twice, but more like celebrating with different groups of people. He said that our quiet dinner was the most important celebration to him, but that it would also be nice to acknowledge this achievement with the people he worked with every day, the ones who'd supported him through the process of earning this promotion. But I could already tell he wasn't really hearing what I was trying to communicate to him. He wasn't even attempting to understand where I was coming from or why this might be hurtful to me. Jessica launched into this whole elaborate explanation about how our quiet dinner should be enough for him, how if he really valued our relationship, he wouldn't need validation from other people about his success. She told me it hurt her feelings that I wanted to share this important moment with anyone besides her, like celebrating with my coworkers somehow diminished what we had together. And honestly, for a hot second, I almost bought into her logic completely. I almost started feeling genuinely guilty for wanting to grab a drink with my colleagues, almost convinced myself that maybe she was right and I was being selfish by wanting to acknowledge this promotion with the people I spent 40 hours a week with. But then something clicked in my brain, and I realized this was the exact same script as the dinner party incident, just with different details plugged in. The cold treatment, the guilt trip, the implication that I was somehow choosing other people over her when all I wanted was to exist in the world like a normal human being with normal social connections. I realized that I'd been walking on eggshells for weeks now, constantly checking with her before making any plans, second-guessing every social interaction, slowly cutting myself off from friends and coworkers because it was easier than dealing with her moods and emotional reactions. So when she started the silent treatment that night, when she made herself dinner for one and ate it while completely ignoring my existence, I didn't chase after her like I had before. I didn't apologize or try to explain myself or beg her to talk to me like some desperate boyfriend. I just made my own dinner. watched TV like nothing unusual was happening, and went to bed at my normal time. Thursday morning came around and she was still giving me nothing. She got ready for work in complete silence, gathering her things with that same cold efficiency I remembered from our first fight, and left for work without saying goodbye. But instead of feeling panic like I had before, I felt this weird sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Thursday evening arrived and she was still playing the freeze-out game with full commitment. She was cooking meals for herself, sleeping in the guest room we'd set up for visitors, and acting like I was some stranger she happened to be sharing living space with. But here's the thing. I went to drinks anyway. I told Carlos and the rest of the guys that I'd be there at 5:30 sharp, and I had one of the best nights I'd had in months. We talked about work stuff, argued about stupid movies, debated whether the Heat had any realistic shot at making the playoffs this year. It was completely normal conversation that didn't require me to analyze every word for hidden meanings or potential triggers that might set off some kind of emotional explosion. When I got home around 8 o'clock, Jessica was sitting on our couch looking absolutely furious. I could practically see the steam coming out of her ears, and her whole body language screamed anger and indignation. I knew immediately that she'd been expecting me to skip the entire evening, to come crawling back and apologize for even considering going out and celebrating my own professional success. Instead, I was walking through the door happy and relaxed, probably smelling like beer and chicken wings, completely unbothered by her little performance of wounded feelings and calculated silence. That's when I decided I was completely done with this manipulative bullshit. I was done pretending that her silent treatments were reasonable responses to normal disagreements. Done feeling guilty for having a life outside our relationship, and done letting her control my every move through emotional manipulation and calculated withdrawal. I sat down across from her on the couch and told her straight up that this was the absolute last time she was going to pull this childish nonsense with me. I said if she had a problem with something I was doing, she could use her words like an adult, and we could have an actual conversation about it. But if she ever tried to punish me with silence and emotional withdrawal again, if she ever tried to make me choose between her and having normal social relationships with friends and coworkers, she could pack her stuff and find somewhere else to live. I told her in no uncertain terms that I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore, that I wasn't going to sacrifice my friendships and my mental health just to keep her happy and avoid these ridiculous conflicts. The look on Jessica's face was absolutely priceless. Complete shock, like she couldn't believe I was actually calling her out on this behavior instead of apologizing and promising to do better. She tried to turn the whole situation around on me, started saying that I was being mean and unreasonable, that she wasn't manipulating anyone, and was just a person who needed time to process her feelings when she was hurt. But I wasn't buying into that explanation anymore. I'd seen this pattern too many times now to fall for it again. I told her that needing time to process your emotions and using silence as a weapon to control someone else's behavior were two completely different things, and that if she couldn't tell the difference between those concepts, that was her problem to figure out, not mine. I explained that I loved her, but I wasn't going to love her at the expense of my own mental health and independence. I wasn't going to become one of those guys who gradually loses all his friends because his girlfriend can't handle him having relationships with other people. After that conversation, things actually changed between us for a while. Jessica was more careful about picking her battles with me, and she didn't automatically go into freeze mode every time I made plans that she didn't personally approve of. For a few weeks, I genuinely thought that maybe we'd actually worked through this issue, that she'd finally understood how her behavior was affecting me and our relationship. I should have known better than to think it would be that simple. People like Jessica don't just change their fundamental patterns because you call them out once. They just get more strategic about how they operate, more subtle in their methods of control. So after Tyler's little speech about not tolerating my so-called childish behavior anymore, I figured I'd let him think he'd won this round for a while. Men absolutely love feeling like they're in control of situations, and honestly, it was kind of cute watching him puff up his chest and act all tough and dominant. But I knew it wouldn't last long. It never does with guys like Tyler. The thing about men like him is that they want to play the strong, independent man until it actually costs them something meaningful. Sure, he could handle going to his stupid work drinks when I wasn't speaking to him, when the stakes were relatively low and it was just about some casual after-work socializing. But what happens when the stakes get higher? What happens when he has to choose between me and someone who actually matters to him, someone he has a deep emotional connection with? I was pretty confident that I knew exactly how that scenario would play out, and I wouldn't have to wait very long to test my theory. My opportunity came about 2 weeks later when Tyler's mother called him. I could hear her voice through the phone, that syrupy sweet tone she always used whenever she wanted something from him. And I already knew this wasn't going to go well for our relationship. Tyler's face lit up like Christmas morning the second he heard from her, and he spent 20 minutes on the phone catching up with her while I sat there feeling like a piece of furniture. When he finally hung up, he had this big grin on his face and announced that his mom wanted to come visit this weekend. Notice how he phrased that. Not that she had asked if she could visit, not that she wondered if it might work with our schedule, but that she wanted to visit. And apparently that was supposed to be perfectly fine with me because she's his mother, and mothers get to do whatever they want, right? I told him that we needed to talk about overnight guests before just agreeing to them, that this was my home too, and I deserve some input into who stays here and when. This was basic respect, basic consideration, the kind of thing any reasonable person in a committed relationship would understand without having to be told. But Tyler got that stubborn look on his face, the same one from the work drinks incident, and told me that she was his mother and she was welcome anytime. Welcome anytime in our apartment, without even asking me how I felt about it. So I told him fine. If that's how he wanted to handle it, he could sleep alone that night. And he could definitely sleep alone while his mother was visiting our home. I wasn't going to pretend to be the happy girlfriend when he'd just completely dismissed my feelings about our shared space. Why would I want to be intimate with someone who just shown me that his mommy's comfort was more important than my basic need to be consulted about my own home? How was I supposed to feel close to someone who made unilateral decisions that affected both of us without even pretending to care what I thought about it? Tyler tried to argue with me, saying that I was being unreasonable, that it was just his mother for one weekend. But that wasn't the point, and he knew it. The point was that he'd made a unilateral decision affecting both of us without even pretending to care what I thought about it. The point was that I was supposed to just smile and play hostess to a woman who'd never liked me anyway, and trust me, the feeling was mutual, in my own apartment, without having any say in the matter whatsoever. I figured this would be like the work drink situation, where he'd eventually realize he was being selfish and we'd work it out together like adults. Except this would be even better for our relationship because this time it involved his precious mother. So he'd really understand how much he'd hurt me by excluding me from such an important decision. I went to bed that night expecting him to come apologize, to tell me he'd call her back and ask if another weekend worked better for both of us, to show me that I mattered more than his automatic yes to mommy's demands. Instead, I woke up to the sound of boxes being moved around in the living room. I came out to the living room in my pajamas and found Tyler pulling my stuff out of our shared closet, piling my clothes into garbage bags like he was cleaning house for some kind of massive purge. For a second, I thought he was having some kind of mental breakdown because what kind of person starts packing their girlfriend's belongings at 7 in the morning over a simple disagreement about house guests? But when I asked him what the hell he was doing, he just looked at me with this completely cold expression that I'd never seen from him before. It was like looking at a total stranger who happened to have Tyler's face. He said I had 2 hours to pack whatever he'd missed, and then I needed to be gone from the apartment. He said he'd warned me about this behavior after the work drinks incident, and I'd chosen to ignore his warning, so now I could figure out somewhere else to live. I tried desperately to explain that I wasn't being manipulative, that I was just hurt and needed him to understand how dismissive he'd been about something that affected both of us. I told him that I loved him, that we could work this out like we had before, that I just needed him to show me some basic consideration and respect in our shared home. But he wasn't hearing any of it. He just kept packing my stuff methodically, like I was some stranger who'd overstayed their welcome in his space. When I started crying and begging him to just talk to me like adults, to work through this conflict the way couples are supposed to, he said the time for talking was over. He told me he'd given me a clear warning about using sex and silence to control his behavior, and that the first chance I got, I'd done exactly those things again. He said he wasn't going to spend another day walking on eggshells around my moods and punishments, constantly wondering what normal human interaction was going to set me off next. The worst part was how calm and collected he was about the entire process. There was no yelling, no drama, no emotional outburst. Just this matter-of-fact efficiency, like he was taking out the trash or completing some mundane household chore. He handed me my keys, told me I had until 9 o'clock to get my stuff together, and then went to take a shower like kicking me out was just another item on his Saturday morning to-do list. I kept thinking he'd change his mind, that this was just him trying to scare me into apologizing and promising to do better. But at exactly 9 a.m., he came back into the living room fully dressed and asked if I was ready to go. When I said I didn't have anywhere to stay, he suggested that I call a friend or get a hotel room. But either way, I needed to be out of his apartment in the next 10 minutes. There was no negotiation, no discussion, no opportunity to explain my side or work things out. By 9:30 that morning, I was standing on the sidewalk with 3 suitcases and a garbage bag full of clothes, watching him change the locks on what had been our apartment through the window. I called and texted for hours, but he'd already blocked my number. I sent him emails explaining my perspective and trying to get him to understand where I was coming from, but they all bounced back undelivered. I even tried reaching out through social media, thinking maybe I could get through to him that way, but he'd blocked me everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, every platform we'd ever connected on. Turns out, I completely misjudged Tyler and what kind of person he really was. Most guys will put up with almost anything if you're sleeping with them regularly. They'll bend over backwards to avoid conflict, choosing the path of least resistance every single time rather than deal with uncomfortable conversations or emotional challenges. But apparently Tyler wasn't like most guys I'd dated before. Apparently, he actually meant what he said about not being controlled through emotional manipulation and sexual withdrawal.